So there's a misconception that if you're single, you are incomplete, perhaps damaged, salvaged, and you won't be happy until you find your one. And that is not true. That is bullshit. It is a message that has been fed to us by media and advertising. The truth is, when you're single, you have the richest soil for growth. That's why I created this podcast. And unlike other podcasts, this one is host-driven, not guest-driven. That means I will be rotating health and wellness experts 3 times a week to give you the giant box of wellness crayons, not just the primary colors, so you can start building a meaningful life. It's time to give singlehood a cape.
Hi, I am Lindsay Burke, and I'm back on today with Mauri Konell, the founder of the Girls Empowerment Experience, a movement, mindfulness, mindset, and mental health program that empowers girls and women to move through life with more confidence, with more courage, with more connection to one another, and of course, creativity. She is also a martial artist. She's a CrossFitter, just one of the most incredible people. She's a partner. She's a mom. And for the last 2 weeks, we have had you on, Mauri, and she has been sharing her self-love journey, first telling us about the early days as a little girl and a young woman struggling with trauma, her parents' divorce, an eating disorder and addiction at a certain point in her life, and eventually hitting a very painful rock bottom so early in life. And then we moved on to last week's episode, where she shared how she slowly began to take the reins of her own life, started in therapy, began her fitness journey, and realized a passion for teaching and helping other girls and women, and meeting her now partner in kind of an unconventional way. So we just ended on that last week. So today, Mauri's going to dive more into this relationship, how it's evolved over the last couple of years, the ups and downs, how she's had to confront her past trauma in real time and rewrite her story to continue healing in order to develop something better for herself and her family. So thank you, Mauri, so much for coming on for a 3rd episode. I'm so excited to do this with you. And thank you for sharing your story and being so vulnerable and enlightening us with some of your wisdom that you've gained over the last few years. So you were in business with this man of your dreams. And he was going through a divorce at the time when you guys kind of got the business aspect of things started, and hadn't really shared each feelings around all of this. So you were just beginning to talk about how hard you were working to move away from this idea of how relationships work, just at the time when things were starting to progress in your relationship with him and evolve into maybe more than just business partners and friendship. So I would love to hear more about how that happened and the struggle with that, because it was complicated and it was nuanced. And I think a lot of people can relate to the messiness that life hits us with, and how it really forces us to confront what we value and who we want to be and how we manage the feelings. It's not a Hallmark movie. So yes, please dive in and share with us. I guess starting out, maybe when you were beginning to realize, I have feelings for this guy. He's not available. And what do I do?
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, first of all, for having me again and giving me the space to share. It's so healing for me. And I always say this, but I think that, it's through vulnerability that we heal and grow, and we give that space to others. And so many people have given me that space. I'm so grateful for that, and through sharing their stories, I've learned and healed and grown so much, because I can see myself through their experiences. Right. And so, thank you for giving me this same space. I'm just so grateful.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Grateful for you.
When I was 19, I started working at the karate studio, that you and I met at, and Josh was there. And at the time, I explained in the last episode, I was on and off with my long-term boyfriend, but I had this, and I didn't know intuition, but I had this intuition towards Josh, who is 13 years older than me. So at the time, he was 32, I was 19. It made no sense, but I just had this feeling like, oh my gosh, we are meant to be together. Like, how can he not see that? We're soulmates. We're gonna get married. We're gonna have babies. Like, how does he not see me? Right? Because I'm 19.
Wow, that's so crazy though.
Feeling.
To have that feeling. It's not just a crush. It's not just there's something like I'm connected with this person and
Yes, exactly. I felt and I was already a very sensitive kid, as I mentioned before. I was so afraid of my sensitivity, and when I was 19, I was still numbing my sensitivity. I was still doing drugs, still drinking, still very deep in my eating disorder battle. In college, navigating all kinds of identity crises. I had dropped out of pre-med. I was shifting, I didn't know where I was headed in my career, but I knew that I always wanted to help other girls and young women. I just didn't know how. I had the idea that I was going to be a therapist and that was kind of the only way. I didn't have exposure to other ways of success. I had a very tunnel vision about that. And mentioned performance, productivity and perfectionism were all ways that I felt worthy. There were all ways that I felt like enough, even though it was never enough, because that had to come from within me, but I didn't know that yet. I was still seeking it outside of myself. In any case.
And I think so many people relate to that. So many people relate to that. It was our generation was most definitely inundated with that, unless you were raised by entrepreneurs and people who were kind of outside of the system, getting an education, following the rule book, essentially other people creating the script for how you succeed and how you do life. That was already so pre-programmed into every aspect of how we went through our days. That means how much of our waking time do we spend in school growing up with someone else saying, okay, if you meet this criteria, then you're a good enough person. Then you're a good enough student, and you're good enough at math and good enough at English and good enough at doctoring and good enough at whatever. So it makes sense that you've got this programming, and it's a very kind of linear plan that you have for yourself as far as what you can do in order to be enough or successful. And then with the family stuff on top of it, I think so many people relate to that. They're like, well, I don't even know how to get off the treadmill. What else is there?
Right. And then I had this, sort of dark night of the soul experience that many people talk about. And this realization that nothing changes if nothing changes. And I think I mentioned last time too, that because of my trauma from my childhood and wanting so badly love, but I didn't know what that was. I knew what I didn't want. I knew that I didn't want a marriage like my parents, but I had never had an example besides my grandparents. But even that to me was like this 1950s, like long-term partnership, that they had been in, but I didn't see like the rom-com, passionate love that every little girl wanted, right? Like I didn't have any examples of that in my real life, but I so badly wanted that. I so badly wanted a relationship. And so during that rock bottom, part of my motivation to to learn how to love myself, because everybody kept saying, oh, just love yourself. No one will love you until you love yourself. Part of my motivation for that was because I desperately wanted love, right? And that was coming from pain. That was coming from not having love in my life. So I didn't really go about it the quote right way, right? Like it wasn't the way that you're supposed to go about healing yourself, because it was still for something sort of outside of me. And at the same time, we're a social species. We're not meant to be alone. We're not meant to walk this life without a partner. And so I want to hold space for that too.
I'm glad you're
That's
saying that.
human need and desire. And it doesn't all come from lack. It also comes from, following your heart and following your dreams and following your soul, what your soul wants. And I felt that deep in my soul. So anyway, go into this
Good.
dive, into healing my trauma and journaling and writing and going to therapy, as you said, and being in nature, going on these hikes and having these like come to God moments out in the Santa Monica Mountains, and learning how.
Did Josh know about this at the time? Were you talking with him about any of this when you two were working together?
We were
Did you
talking
share?
a little bit about, the journeys that we were on, but we were both still so afraid of vulnerability at that point. I hadn't
Mm,
shared anything publicly yet about my eating disorders and my addiction. I hadn't, I was on Instagram, but I hadn't even posted a picture of myself yet. I was still learning how to
mm,
love myself. I was still learning how to be myself, during this time. And so I got to this place where I really liked myself, and I really did start to love who I was. And I think, I think that is when you attract a partner in your life, and the whole saying, no one will love you until you love yourself. It's not true. People will love you. You just won't be
yeah.
ready to receive it, and you won't trust it, because you can only trust the love that you give to yourself, right? So if you are not believing that you're worthy, or trusting that you're worthy, or treating yourself with love, because love is a verb. It's not just something we feel, it's something we do. Then when love shows up, or it won't show up, because you won't attract it into your life until you're a mirror for it, because we are all mirrors. People, humans,
Yes.
we're all mirrors of each other. Okay.
Yes.
Um,
And that I just heard something the other day that was so big, since we're talking about relationships right now. The She said, you look at those non-negotiables, like you look at that ideal man that you want to date, you look at that ideal woman that you want to date, and write down all of those things and all those negotiables. You always hear about that, and you've got that list. Nobody ever does the reverse. Nobody ever says, okay, what kind of partner would that person want? Am I that? Am I someone who's really the value and the self-worth, and containing the sense of confidence, and the sense of discipline, and all of these qualities that I want in someone else. Not that someone isn't worthy of being loved, but also able to be a really solid partner. Am I also bringing that to the table, and that's those strengths to a relationship? Or am I bringing, addiction? Am I bringing, habits and things that are lower in integrity, and to the table? But I'm wanting, here's what I want from someone else, but then I'm not even exhibiting those things. You're talking about this self-responsibility around saying, when I show up as a stronger version and more integrated version of myself, I'm also naturally going to not just attract, because I think people do attract. If you're an attractive person, not just physically, but just as a whole, if you have attractive qualities about you, you're going to attract all kinds of people, good, bad, and ugly. You're going to get all kinds of different energies and people in your life. But the people who really share your values and really share those qualities are going to be the ones who want to keep you around as well, versus not wanting to keep you around. And as well as, the vice versa, that there's going to be that level of feeling seen because they've also done the work, and you can see them because you've done the work. And so there's more intimacy there that's possible when you're more actualized, entering into that dynamic. So I think you just named it, that now you are evolving into a version of yourself that can attract a version of another person, and you're attracted to a version of another person that's a little different, that you might have been attracted to and would have been attracted to you at the time.
Oh my goodness. Yes, 1,000,000%. And it's so interesting that you mentioned all that, because yes, in that 3-year period, I was on accident becoming the partner that I wanted to be, right? But also, I'm going to get back to this, because you can only do so much work on yourself, and work, quotes, on relationship by yourself. Because at
Yes.
some point, you have to get in the arena. You have to get on the court, on the field, in the pool. Like, you can only do so much by yourself because you are not going to see your gaps until they're illuminated in relationship with someone else. So this idea that you have to be fully healed to be in relationship is not true. It's actually impossible because
Yes.
you first of all, we're never going to be fully healed. There's no finish line. There's no I'm cured, I love myself, that's just not life. Life is going to be an endless self-love journey, an endless journey of healing. There are going to be things in our life that we feel sad about for the rest of our lives, and that's okay. There is nothing wrong with feeling sad. It doesn't mean that you're not healed. It doesn't mean that you are not healing or growing. It means that you're healed. So learning how to accept all parts of yourself, and knowing that you don't have to be at this enlightened, we're not the Buddha. Like, you're not going to be at this enlightened
No.
place where it's the quote perfect time and now you're ready for a relationship. The perfect time doesn't exist. It
No.
your perfect time. It will be your divine timing. And part of that is out of your human control. We're a little bit too human to determine the divine timing, in my opinion. That's, kind of my spiritual take on it. But that
Yeah.
happens, in the moment that it's meant to. And also that, yeah, you can only do so much of that work on your own. And it is not until you're in relationship that the real work begins, truthfully. And
every person bring a new dynamic that illuminates
yes,
different parts of yourself. Every
right.
person.
Exactly.
Yes. Every person, every, life stuff. You're not going to know what kind of person. I don't know what kind of person I'm going to be to grieve a major person in my life until that happens to me. And so life is also going to hit you with things that you haven't had practice with, and you get to, you're going to experience a new version of yourself in all of those life events. So I'm so glad you bring that up, that there's a lot of grace around the process of evolving and the process of growing. That's not a finish line.
Yeah.
That's so big.
Huge. And, as somebody who struggled with addiction and eating disorders, if you're anybody who struggles with that voice in your head of addiction, eating disorders, OCD, whatever that voice is for you, learning that voice was going to be with me for the rest of my life and that's okay. That was huge, right? Learning to, what we resist. So the more we fight something, the stronger it becomes. And learning how to coexist with all parts of yourself without judging it, without hating it, with, that grace that you're talking about, that is okay to bring into relationship as long as you're aware of it, as long as you know and understand your triggers and you understand your different voices and you can practice being aware of them so that they're not running the show or driving the bus, as my mentor said. That is,
I would say name it to tame it. You got to name it to tame it. I know it's there, and it's allowed to have a voice, but I still get to be the driver. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that self-responsibility.
And so I think Josh and I, individually, we're kind of in very similar places, which is why, this timing was sort of divine for us. However, it was far from perfect timing. It was far from, the ideal start to a relationship when we realized that we had feelings for each other. I'm writing a book, and so I don't want to give it all away. I want people to, be excited to read about it. There was a night that finally we realized that we had feelings for each other. And, at this point I had been sort of banging my head against my steering wheel, like, snap out of it, Mauri, get this out of your head. You're making it up. It's not real. What you feel isn't real. Forget about it. Because he was in a marriage, and I knew my values enough to know that I wasn't going to become involved with somebody who was in another relationship, and no matter what. And so, I tried to convince myself that what I was feeling was just not real and that it wasn't mutual. But like I said, it was very much this cosmic, undeniable connection that, had probably, like I said, been there since I was 19, and I was just finally accepting that it was there. And so one night, Josh finally told me that how he felt about me. And I was like, oh my gosh, I feel the same way. I thought it was crazy. This,
Wow.
he was very much beside himself because he was confused about his life, and he was confused about his feelings for me, and being, in a marriage that was ending and starting another, relationship at the same time as when ending felt so wrong for him and so scary for him, understandably. And so the beginning of our relationship was extremely difficult. And while we had a very deep love and connection built on friendship. It was already built on such a solid foundation of openness and trust, and as friends, right? But because
Yeah.
he was healing through his separation and divorce and facing his trauma in that way, um, while I was ready to start our relationship, I was like, we're
Finally,
married.
I can
Yeah,
only imagine.
right. We're meant to be together. Finally, you know, this is happening, and I'm ready, and I'm
Yeah.
like in this great place in my life, and I have this new beach house and this great job, and I'm healthy, and I'm sober, and I'm totally in love with my life and myself, and now I have this man of my dreams who is everything I've ever wanted. Excuse me, everything I've ever wanted. And we're having this like whirlwind romance, like
Yeah.
extremely, and by the way, I will say nothing happened until he was separated, right? So we shared our feelings verbally to each other, but then there was that period of time that like we knew we had feelings for each other, but also he was navigating a separation. And so there was this limbo period, which was awful, right? Because like we knew we
Yeah.
had feelings for each other so deeply, but nothing could happen because he was going through separation.
And you're still working together. It's not
We're
like you
still
can
working
take some space.
together. It was
Oh,
thing. And then
that's brutal.
the separation did happen, and we did begin, essentially dating. We had this amazing whirlwind romance that was it was everything I had seen in movies growing up. And all of the people saying like, "Oh, it's just a movie that doesn't really exist, that doesn't really happen." I mean, I would have these moments where I would be like outside myself looking in going, "Oh my god, this is exactly like the movies." Like I can remember being a teenager, and the like all of the teeny bopper movies that in the 90s and 2000s that I would just like pine over. Oh my gosh, one day, like there's all this like that doesn't exist. That's just a movie. No, it was
And by the way, for listeners, I always want people to know this too. I've been I've been with my spouse forever. It feels like, I don't know. We laugh. We're like, were we ever not together?
yeah,
Feels like forever. That can continue. I always want to give couples
yes,
hope. I want to give people that it doesn't just have to happen at the
no,
beginning. It can pop up, feelings come and go, but the honeymoon can cycle back through so many
so good.
points in your life
Yes,
when you're working, when you're doing the work, and when you're on the journey, and when you're continuing to grow separately and together. And sometimes it's separate for long, long bouts of time. But I'm so glad. Yeah, I always want to say
so good.
that can happen.
It's
Those
so
feelings can be wonderful, and it can sustain some of that even when it's really hard. Sometimes it even gets better. It can
true.
get even better with time.
Josh always
But yeah, so
better. Yeah, that's something that
say that again.
Josh always says that it has gotten better. That
Yeah.
everything has gotten better as we've gotten closer and stronger as a partnership and as a family. And there were, so many people at that time who were telling me that it was just a honeymoon phase, that I was just a rebound,
Wow.
that it wasn't it wasn't going to last forever, and that, you know,
Mm,
that weren't able to support me during that time because it was so
mhm.
unconventional and it was so out of the box, how our relationship was starting. And so I learned that I had to be
It's
really
tough.
careful with who I shared my experience with, because a lot of times, first of all, you're the only one in your relationship. You are the only one who truly is in it. And a lot of times people can project their own fears onto your relationship and their own experiences and their own trauma and their own ideas. And so I learned, eventually, it took me a while, but I learned eventually that I had to keep it really sacred. And there were only a select few people, maybe one actually person, besides my therapist, that I could talk to about my relationship that was blooming with Josh, because there was a lot of negativity and a lot of, understandably, a lot of caution. And,
Sure.
um,
Sure.
but it was really confusing sometimes because I was in it and I was experiencing a love like I could never have even dreamed up how good it was. And I
Mm,
had, talk about self-love journey. I mean, I hadn't worn shorts in probably like 10 years. And I was
wow.
loving my body, and I was learning to love my body through CrossFit and what my body could do. And as a happy accident, I was loving what my body looked like. And not that I was seeking validation from Josh, but again, he was just that mirror of it where he was like, wow, I love your legs. And he was so vocal about like loving a part of me that I had hated my entire life and tried to change
Yeah.
my entire life. And then one day my hair was wet and dried, and I have super, it's done right now, but I have super curly hair, and I had straightened it, literally since I was 9 years old. I can remember asking my
Wow.
clothing iron and straighten my hair with a clothing iron because I thought that was beautiful. And so anyway, my hair dried curly, and he's like, oh my gosh, that's your
What?
hair? And then from then on, I mean, to this day, if I am doing anything with a heat product, he's like, why are you burning your hair? And that of him telling me I was beautiful, so then I believed I was beautiful. I already was learning to love my own beauty and myself, and he was reflecting that back to me, and it was feeling so good to be seen and to
That's
right,
it.
to be in part
Owning it.
someone who was loving me for me. And I was showing up as all of me, like I had never before, because we were giving each other space to be truthful and vulnerable and flawed and messy. And it was so messy because even though we were having this amazing connection and love, and we could see our future together. I mean, we were already talking about a family and children and marriage, and we were basically from very early on sort of living together. I mean, we would be together like 4 or 5 nights a week. And at the same time, Josh was navigating this the ending of a long-term relationship. He was coming to terms with parts of himself, and for the first time he was learning how to be vulnerable and truthful and true to himself, and he was afraid that he was repeating old coping mechanisms, and had also people in his life giving him very negative messaging about rushing into another relationship, and that I was again just that rebound, even though we couldn't deny what we were feeling and what we knew in our bones and in our cells to be true about being together. In any case, he was very explicit that he could not be in a committed relationship with me, and that he was not ready to say that we were in a committed relationship. And this was very confusing for me because we were telling each other we loved each other. We were spending so much time together. We were talking about our futures. We were more emotionally intimate than I had ever been with any person in my entire life.
Yeah.
Um, I was learning, one of the most beautiful things was the moments that I would cry and share my truth and speak my truth were the moments that we got closer. And he would tell me, how being vulnerable made us closer and stronger together. And I had never experienced that in my life, not with my own parents, not with my friends, certainly not with boyfriends or, hookups. And so we were building this really strong relationship, and he was adamant that it was not a relationship, that we were not in a committed relationship. And so it was incredibly confusing for me and so
So hard.
hard for me because I kept wanting to trust what I knew in my heart and in my bones that we were meant to be together. And, there were many times that he requested space, and that was the most excruciating thing for me at first, because to me, space meant abandonment. I didn't know how to give space. As I mentioned in my last relationship, that was really the downfall, or part of the downfall in my previous relationship, because I wouldn't give space when it was asked for.
There are two big things that kind of stand out, if I can interrupt you really quick,
Yeah.
that really stand out to me when you saying this. One is, I really appreciate from him the integrity of holding the boundary. It would be so easy for someone who's in that circumstance to also be afraid of losing you and not be honest and start something sooner than they're ready. And I tell people all the time, someone having the courage to tell you no, it shows, first of all, some intimacy. It also shows self-worth. It shows courage. It shows boundaries. It shows a lot of qualities that you want in a partner. You want someone to be able to tell you no. And then part of the strength is being able to accept that no, someone's truth and someone's rejection, especially as a parent. Now you know how important it is to be able to hold space for a no from someone. Those little people are powerful, but just the alternative is someone being with you when they don't want to be either, or when they're not feeling fully invested, or they're not fully ready. When I say not fully ready, I don't mean that we're ever ready fully for the relationship, but in the sense of, someone showing up when they want to be there because they're choosing to be, as opposed to them also entering the relationship out of fear. So I want to acknowledge the value in receiving that no from someone else, even when you hate it, you hate hearing it, how important that is. But the other piece of it is, obviously there was this investment of eventually maybe I'll get him. But what I love that you said is, I had to do something different or I was going to keep having the same result. So even if the result was that you and Josh didn't end up working out, what you were working was this muscle of resilience around containing yourself and holding on to yourself, even when someone else can't be that person that you're hoping and wanting them to be for you, to be able to take on that responsibility as an adult. And again, I don't want to enter into that stage of perpetrating the belief that we can do it all on our own and we don't need other people. I don't think that's it at all. I think what we do need to acknowledge is that you were desperately missing a secure base, which makes it so much more painful. If you've got an amazing relationship with your parents, if you've got an amazing relationship with friends and other support systems in your life, it's a lot easier to contain and hold on to yourself in those hard times. And when you're rejected, it takes so much work and really, really being able to take care of yourself and acknowledge all the feelings and process all the feelings when you're having to contain that kind of rejection or that type of pause or hold that you had to do when you don't have that support coming from other places. And I commend you on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think that's why people jump back into relationships. That's why we desperately hold on to relationships that are unhealthy, is that it is so painful to feel that loss or to not have that need met when you feel, at least at the time, that it's right there, because it's such a human need. And to be able to do that, ideally when we're a secure individual and we have that support system, but we're also healed, a lot more healed, we're able to hold onto those periods a lot longer, which allows us to sustain relationships for longer as well. I think people don't realize in long-term relationships, it's the fact that they've been able to ride the ride and they can ride the wave and the ebbs and the flows, because that distance and those pauses are going to happen even when you're in a long-term relationship. So you were building that muscle right then by saying, I can't have what I want right now. And how am I going to manage this without becoming the person that I used to be,
Yeah.
that I don't want to be anymore.
And it was
so just huge.
Thank you, Lindsay. Yeah, it's you're right. When it's your deepest wound and your deepest trigger, and you don't have the solid foundation, but that being said, I did have the foundation of that last 3 years that I had myself.
Yes.
So that
good point.
I was learning how to reparent myself, and I was learning about my own trauma and triggers. So when this was coming up, I was aware of what was happening for me, right? Like, I wasn't just going in blindly. I knew why I was feeling triggered because I had done work on my childhood and my trauma to know myself better. And so that also helps, because then you can start to give yourself what you need. Like I said, I was turning that flashlight on myself and saying, okay, what is it that I'm really needing from him? That safety, security, that love, that control, that certainty, how can I give that to myself? How can I, give myself that same comfort? And listen, I was not perfect. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure it was, there were some days where, you're not as strong as others.
On my part too, because I was like, oh, well, he's saying that he doesn't want to be in a committed relationship with me, but we're in one. We were.
It's confusing.
It was so confusing because we were in a relationship, but we weren't. It doesn't even really make sense. But
well, and I think you're naming right now the nuance and the complexity, and again, the pressure from the outside world to have definitions and to have rules on some of these things. And the reality is, it just doesn't typically work that way. It just, sometimes it's messy, it's confusing. Even within my 16-year relationship with my spouse, there have been times where we're definitely more married. We're meeting more criteria for being married. And then other times where we're meeting more criteria for roommates. And then we're meeting more criteria for distant, acquaintances. It's just, so those definitions just make things really confusing when we feel that pressure of self-acceptance, but also acceptance of where you're at in the relationship when you're comparing it to those expectations. Well, and if we can, Mauri, because there are a few things that I think are so important now that you are where you're at. If we can jump forward a little bit into the relationship that you have now, where you've been together for years, you have a daughter now together. How long has it been that you've been, I guess, officially dating once all of that?
Well, there's no like, it's hard to say what the marker for like officially is. All of this began almost 8 years ago. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So there have been years. It's been a number of years that you've really kind of been. Yeah. So what are some of the things now, looking back, about the version of yourself that you've become, that you really like about yourself, that has paid off, that you're seeing the results of now, even when it's really hard, even when there's conflict between you two, even when there's uncertainty, even when there are other life challenges that make life hard. What are the aspects of this work that are paying off now in the relationship, and versions of yourself that have shifted as a result of this work?
That's a great question. I think, like I said before, you can only do so much work on yourself alone, and you can only do so much work on relationships alone. You have to get in the arena. You have to, you can like read the manual and watch a YouTube video on how to ride a bike, but you're not going to know how to ride a bike till you get on the bike. So one thing that, I really am proud of is that in the messiness of those first 3 years, that number one, I was able to trust myself and my inner knowing of what was right for me. I certainly
Mm.
made mistakes in that. I certainly, put his needs before my own at times, even though I needed or wanted that commitment.
So I'm so glad that you bring it back to keeping it very simple, keeping it very small. I remember even the first episode that we had together, you were talking about just sitting, and I can't remember what it was that was the context, but you were just talking about sitting and breathing and not making the phone call
Mhm.
to your ex-boyfriend. You're like, I'm gonna do it for 1 minute, and then I can add a second minute. I'm just gonna not call him for 5 minutes. Okay, I'm gonna see if I can make it to an hour. But something that is as small as that, it does build that muscle and that discipline, but also the self-trust.
Yeah.
Because when it's so small, you're teaching yourself, I can count on me.
Yes.
I can count
Yeah.
on me.
I
Yeah.
myself. I keep my commitments to myself. And it's that, just like with kids or with dogs, it's positive reinforcement, right? We get
Yeah.
proud of ourselves for following through. That feels good. So it's a reward that we get for ourselves, and it makes us want to do more because we want to keep feeling good. We want to keep feeling
Yes.
that positive reward. And so starting
Yes.
one tiny, tiny step is going to have this snowball effect that you can't even see yet. You don't even, and the thing is, for somebody just starting on this journey or wanting to make a change, you don't have to know all the fine tune details. You don't have to know exactly how
The result.
play out. You don't have to know the exact next steps that you're going to take. Um,
Because you can't.
no, you can't.
I just think, God, the 19-year-old version of myself couldn't have imagined this. If I told them that I'd be doing some of the things that I'm doing now, I'd be like, what? I wouldn't have wanted that for myself. I wouldn't have even set that as a goal. Yeah.
Because the other thing is
Yeah.
going to be better than you can ever imagine. And when you try to control it, you're limiting yourself. By surrendering and by letting go and taking your hands off the wheel a little bit, you are letting it be better than you can ever possibly imagine. And I think we all have this choice of, as humans, we're hardwired to think, what's the worst thing that can happen? Because that's our protective mechanism. If we think about the worst thing that can happen, then we can, quote, protect ourselves from it and stay in that survival mode. But the flip side of the coin that we rarely ask ourselves is, well, what's the best thing that could happen?
And I think anybody who's been on the other side of the journey, often they have to go through like a cleansing of their life because they realize, even if it's not bad, if there aren't bad aspects of their life, but they're not integrated with who they're becoming and who they've become, because they were the aspects and the people and the lifestyle and the job and all of these elements of their life were, they fit for the traumatized version of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They don't fit for this newer version of
Yeah.
themselves. So Mari, if we can, let's fast forward a little bit to being in this relationship. I'm so curious how your relationship progressed and how it evolved and how it had to evolve once you got into it and it was committed and you two were established and you were ready to move forward, or maybe you weren't, maybe that was a part of the process. But what had to shift in order for you to enter into a more conscious relationship, that what you'd consider a more purposeful way of engaging with one another and loving one another and supporting one another, that was just so different from prior relationships, for sure, but even maybe the early stages of your relationship?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think, similarly to when I was struggling with drugs and alcohol and my eating disorder, and sort of, the concept of nothing changes if nothing changes really carried over for me, where I realized if I kept doing the same thing, if I kept repeating my, dynamics in relationships, I was going to keep getting the same results. And so I was finally willing to do something so entirely different because I wanted this so badly, and as I said, I wanted love, even though I didn't really know what that was, because it was, as you guys heard, just never modeled to me. I didn't know, besides movies and, what you see on TV or in reading books. I didn't know what the love I was going after actually was. I didn't know what a conscious relationship was. But I knew what I didn't want. I knew that I could do the opposite, of what I had done in the past. And so learning how to be the person, like take that flashlight that I was shining so brightly on Josh, like, be this for me. I need you to be this, right? Inside, internally. That's kind of the story that we're telling is like, okay, we're putting this flashlight on the other person. We want them to be who we want them to be in the relationship, right? We need them to be that person. That's that codependent thing that shows up. And I would start to take that flashlight and like reverse it and put it on myself and say, okay, how can I be that? Like everything that I want from Josh, how can I be that person? How can I be the supportive person? How can I hold the space? I knew I wanted to be somebody who, I would constantly ask myself, who am I in relationship? Well, I want to be somebody who supports the other person. I want to be somebody who holds the space, and can accept what he's feeling and what he's going through, even if I don't understand it. Right. And I think, I'm such an empath. So I want to be like, oh, I understand. But the thing is, I don't understand. And I'm never going to understand what it's like to be in my late 30s, early 40s as a man going through a divorce, coming from the childhood that he went through. I can't understand that, but I can accept it, right? And I can accept that he copes with those things differently than the way that I cope with my trauma, right? And so learning that acceptance, and this is something I had to heal with my own parents too, is acceptance doesn't require you to like something. It doesn't require you to agree with it. It doesn't require you to condone it. It is peace. It's feeling peace with something that you feel like you don't have to control it or fix it or change it anymore, right? And so I had to take my hands off the I had to take my hands off the wheel a little bit and allow him to have his process, and learning how to give that space was so excruciating for me. And it wasn't always physical space. Sometimes it was energetic space, and sometimes it was physical space. And that was so hard for me because the fear of abandonment or the fear that he was going to find somebody better or forget about me or, all of those past fears from my previous relationship where I couldn't give space, where I, flat out refused to give space. Those fears were still there, right? But now I would needed to learn how to trust that it was okay to do something different because it meant that I might get what I wanted. And that was more important to me. That was, the prospect of maybe having it was way better than knowing that if I kept doing the same thing, I was definitely not going to have it. And so I would often tell myself, like, okay, well, if I just give him, like, what if I just gave him this space right now that he's needing, right? And I continue to work on myself. I continue to shine that flashlight back on me and say, okay, what do I need? What am I wanting from him? How do I give that to myself? Right? What if I did this temporarily, right? And that meant I got to be with him for the rest of my life. That means I do get the relationship that I want forever. If I go through this temporary discomfort, right? And so again, kind of like bringing in that voluntary adversity or that temporary discomfort, getting comfortable in the uncomfortable, right? That I had sort of learned from CrossFit and I had learned from sobriety and I'd taken these themes and brought it in, right? So I think, I think that was a huge part of what progressed, at least on my end, right? Because we can only control our side of the street, right? And we can't ever force someone to be willing. I couldn't force Josh to do his individual work. And he had to do what he needed to do in healing his own trauma and his own, his separation and his divorce and entering this, new relationship with me. That's not my job, right? My job is to show up as the person that I want to be in the relationship, to honor my own boundaries, to honor myself, which by the way, I didn't always do. I often, was still learning how to honor my own boundaries. I was still learning how to, yes.
Of having to do well. And I want to ask you something, Mari, too, because this is so important. it's not totally irrational, this fear of someone leaving,
Yeah.
to say, okay, if I give space, they may leave. For the people out there who really struggle with this, what would you say to these, women and young men
Yeah.
and girls? I don't want to, I'm afraid they're going to leave me, and if I give them space, it might make it easier for them to leave me. How is this practice still beneficial, even if they do leave? Even if for
Such a good
whatever
point.
reason that person ends up not being a good fit, what is still helpful about this practice? Because there are people like, what,
Yeah.
no way. That's then my fear coming true.
Mhm.
I gave them space and they left me.
Then they're not for you. Then that's not your person, and it's alignment. It's all about alignment. And
Yeah.
I think we can redefine, as people who come, like myself, who come from this fear of not being good enough, or this fear of abandonment, or always needing to be perfect for somebody else to love you, this sort of old story of not being lovable. I think it's really important for us to redefine rejection, that it's not rejection, it's redirection or protection, right? Some people say rejection is God's protection, or rejection is redirection. So it is as cliche as it sounds. Like, what's that old saying about, like, if you let a bird free and it leaves, it was never meant to be, or if it comes back to you, then it was yours, right? Something like, I don't know, I'm not saying it correctly,
Yeah,
but
I haven't heard
something
that, but
like
I
that.
love that.
And so
Yeah, especially
reminding yourself,
you're really
that
answered,
yes,
allowed to exist right then and there, as opposed to trying to force something or elongate an answer you're eventually going to come to anyways.
nothing forced is, I also would remind myself nothing forced is going to last. It's not going to be, it's not going to be strong enough to last. And I guess, what would I say to other people? It really comes back to focusing on what you can control, and that's yourself, and healing and understanding your own trauma and your childhood, your relationships, your parents' relationship, where you come from, so you can understand who you are in relationship and why you have that fear in the first place. And also understanding and learning. And I think this was a huge part of what progressed, you know, relationship for Josh and I, is understanding your partner's trauma and their conflicts. I mean, their childhood conflicts, and where they come from and why they cope the way that they cope. Because then you can understand in the moment of conflict what's actually happening, right? And so learning how to have healthy conflict, learning how to have healthy space, sometimes is so important to healing. And this is, I think I said this before, we can only do so much work on relationship by ourselves. It's not until you're in the arena, you're on the bike, that, you really get to embody and practice and put, not to the test, but really, practice is the best word. Practice these skills and, work on relationship in real time, because you can't do it all on your own. You have to do it in the context of the relationship, but it does require you to understand one another and to respect one another, to have a mutual respect for one another's traumas and triggers. And it doesn't mean enable them, it doesn't mean indulge them, but having that understanding can help you navigate, if that is your trigger, right? The fear of abandonment, and that about yourself, then when that shows up, you're able to give yourself what you need, instead of possibly relying on that other person to give you what you need in the moment. And that doesn't mean, these are all nuanced, because also we do need, trust and safety. And we do need to be able to depend on other people. As humans, we're a social species. We're meant to work together. We're meant for collaboration and partnership and companionship. But I think one of the nuances is intention.
I was going to hit you with that one next, because I was wondering where that line is, which is tricky.
Yes.
How do I move also away from, I'll wait as long as you need me to, and I'll do whatever you want me to. I'll be the one who always adapts, and I'll be the one who always hold space when there isn't mutuality. But I kind of going back really quickly to what you were saying, I love the idea. I always use like a sports analogy, that idea of these football players, because it's football season. They are training and weightlifting and doing all these things on their own before they even get out on the field,
Yes.
so that they are fast enough that when that ball is thrown to them, they can get to it. They're strong
Okay.
enough to do that. They're strong enough to do that push. So they're doing that weightlifting. So, I mean, essentially what you're talking about is that work you do on yourself creates enough strength to hold space for your partner being human.
Foundation.
And when
Mm-hmm.
conflict, it creates that solid foundation. It creates a solid foundation, ideally, for both of you
Yeah.
to be able to work through that hard stuff together. You're actually coming to one another as a stronger version of, of yourselves
Exactly.
that can handle heavier conflict or heavier
Exactly.
problems.
Yes.
Which
And,
happen.
and it's so important to remind, if you're people listening, that you can't force the other person, or there's no perfect magic words that you can say or perfect thing that you can do to get the other person to do that work for themselves, right? Like that's not your job. And but the more that you do that for yourself, the more you might offer space for the other person to feel safe to do that for themselves, right? And that's not to say you're in control of it, because you're not in control of anyone else but you. And that's, again, where I always come back to that flashlight, like turn it back on yourself, give yourself what you need in that moment. Be who you want to be in the relationship, be who you want to be to yourself in your self relationship, right? But giving that space
That means boundaries.
yes.
I think too. Sometimes that also means boundaries with the other person to
Right.
say, hey, there's a difference. There's a different energy, but between I'm offended and I'm upset and I'm angry with you versus you're not able to show up right now in the way that I'm needing, and I need to take space to protect myself. I can see why, and I can have empathy for your situation. It still allows for a different kind of energy around how someone else's work that hasn't been done
Yeah.
responded to by you.
Yeah.
So I love that shining. They can't take care of me. I can take care of myself. But I'm not going to try to fix them or push them to a place they can't go right now.
Exactly.
That's not my
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, as you say that, I think Josh was really good about setting those boundaries with me, and he was very vocal and expressive about needing that space and time with himself, and also wanting, and also recognizing that I was needing something different, that I was ready for this relationship. I wanted it. I needed it. I was in it, I was ready to go. And thank God we didn't go ready to go in those first 3 years, because there was more work to be done. It was illuminating parts of myself that still needed healing on my side, to like that foundation of what you said about the weight, the weightlifting and the training on your own. I didn't know, but I had more of that to do before we could enter the next phase of our committed relationship. And had I not gone through all of that conflict and the struggles and the pain, and, I wouldn't have been ready to progress into the next phase of our committed relationship, which, really did happen organically. And when I stopped trying to force it, and when I let go, and not let go physically, but let go energetically, when I stopped trying to control and fix and force, that is when it started progressing organically. And Josh had his role, right? Like I can't really speak to, and he'll share his part in that, but that was my part, and I think that was where I needed to shift and change and show up for myself. And I also remember, like, I think this is so important too, the power of what we focus on, right? In our reticular activating system. Like, there was a moment where I realized, wow, I always talk about this so negatively, and I realized that I was complaining, when friends would talk to me, or, and so it was another moment where I realized, oh, I have got to shift my mindset about this and act as if, just like I had, again, when I healed my relationship with food and exercise and drugs and alcohol, I was acting as if, right? Not fake it till you make it, but acting as the woman that I wanted to be. And so I noticed how my language would change when I would talk about Josh. People say, "Oh, how's he doing? How's everything going with that?" And instead of like, "Oh, this is so hard with them," but it was like, "Oh, everything is awesome. You know, we're growing, we're learning, we are." And here's the thing: like, even amidst those challenges and conflicts, it was the most amazing, miraculous relationship I had ever experienced, which was also, like you said, well, how do I know when to let go of this, right? That was part of how I knew that I could keep going because of what it was giving me. You know, it was giving me this space to be myself. Josh was showing up, and, you know, the times that I would come vulnerably broken and crying, and, you know, what I would think were the ugliest parts of myself were the moments he would cry with me and say, you know, this is what brings us closer together. I feel more connected to you when you're vulnerable and honest. Thank you for sharing. Please share more with me. Let me be here for you. You know, I am more in love with you than ever. And I had never had that in any relationship in my life, not with my parents, my friends, boyfriends. I mean, it was one of the biggest gifts that he ever gave me was space, you know, to navigate the challenges that I was facing. And even though he couldn't understand what I was going through, the acceptance and the love and support that he gave me, and the mirror that he gave me, that, you know, that was who he wanted in the relationship. He wanted me to be vulnerable and honest and authentic to myself, right? And so I was learning so much about what a conscious relationship is. And through that, we were able to continue progressing in terms of, you know, navigating conflicts differently and understanding. But again, we were doing this work separately too, understanding our own traumas individually so that when we had conflict, we could honor ourselves in the moment as well, right? And so that self-awareness was so powerful in the way our relationship was progressing. I don't know if that makes sense.
That's so good. That totally makes sense. You kind of answered my question, but just to add on to that, what are the parts of you that you really like now about yourself, even when it's hard, even when it's challenging to not revert back to old ways, or this is actually the one that's chopping through the bush, you know, it'd be so much easier to take a different route and you're choosing the hard. But what is it that at the end of the day you're able to lean on with regards to knowing this is better for me, this is better for us, because I like who I am at the end of it?
So good. Such a good question. So we were in Boston over the holidays and Christmas, and we all got COVID. And we were you know, and our flight got delayed. So there were all these things that happened where we had to stay longer. And of course we were stressed, and there were, you know, family dynamics that were stressful. There was all kinds of things that were leading up to this conflict that he and I had. The holidays can be very triggering for people, right? And we had this giant conflict, and we both were very reactive. This was just this past year. So this is fast forward like 8 years, right, into our relationship. We still have conflicts. We still have major conflicts. And this was one of them. It was very painful, and I needed to take some space. So I went for a run in the freezing cold by myself, and I sat by the water afterwards, crying and holding myself. And I thought, wow, this feels so good. It was a moment where this juxtaposition of being in the pain of conflict with your partner, but also trusting that it was going to be okay and we were going to work through it, even if we couldn't work through it immediately and we needed that space. But the juxtaposition of that with what I actually would answer your question with was the home that I've made within myself. And that is what feels the best, is that even when I'm in pain and trauma and, you know, PTSD and this conflict within our relationship, or any conflict really, that I'm able to come home to myself, and that comfort that I feel with myself in knowing that I'm going to be okay, that the intimacy that I've developed with pain to understand pain is not permanent, to understand that I do have tools to live life on life's terms and navigate pain and be comfortable in the uncomfortable. And it almost felt like, as I was, sitting there with myself, it was like this hug that I was giving myself, like this metaphorical, like safe hug. And I was able to recognize, how many times over the past 8 years I've given myself that and have developed that. And whether it was, sobbing on the shower floor 7, 8 years ago in the beginnings of our relationship, rocking back and forth, in that excruciating, like wailing, crying pain, or this 8 years later, sitting on a bench in freezing cold New England with myself, the home that I've made within myself, to know that I am okay and I am safe and I'm always going to be okay. And that pain doesn't last forever. Discomfort doesn't last forever. And that I do have tools to draw on. That's the thing that I love the most, is that I have learned how to be my own knight in shining armor instead of always looking for one to come save me.
And you don't have to be afraid of this flood of feelings either. I can hear
Oh,
the
that's
confidence.
huge. Yeah.
I have to get rejected. That's not okay. Where this time I'm allowed to let all of this happen because I'm able to ride this wave.
Yes. Letting
It's so
myself
wonderful.
feel it all, and knowing that there's nothing wrong with being sad, and there's nothing wrong with being angry, and there's nothing wrong with being anxious. That's all part of the human experience. And, going back to what we talked about with my old story, that doesn't mean I'm broken or there's something wrong with me or I'm diseased or disordered. That means I'm human, and allowing myself to have a full human experience, for the first time in my whole life, these past, I would say 7, 8 years is the first time I've really lived life on life's terms and allowed myself, like you said, to not be so afraid of those feelings, because I can be with myself in those feelings, and also that there again, it's like so nuanced, because also the trust, that Josh and I have developed in knowing that even when we're in really difficult conflict and, like truthfully, really ugly, really messy, where our old coping mechanisms are firing, our old, it's like blast from the past. It's like, oh my God, this is what would happen 8 years ago. Like, are we really doing this again? Like, and you get into that judgment of, I can't believe the other person is really going there. And then the judgment of yourself, like, whoa, I can't believe I just went there. Right. And so you're in the messiness of that and the ugliness of that, but also simultaneously you trust that you are going to navigate it and you are going to get through it, and the other person isn't going anywhere and you're not going anywhere, right? And you're able to notice those old coping mechanisms are firing because that's my old trauma coming up, right? And so you're able to sit with yourself and say, okay, what happened is not what's happening, right? What happened 8 years ago is not what's happening right now. What happened 28 years ago is not what's happening right now. And so, and you've got to get your brain and your body on the same wavelength. They've got to speak the same language. So it's not just talking yourself in and out of it. It's regulating yourself. It's being with your nervous system, which, that's why I went for a run and then sat and meditated and sat by the water. That's my way of bringing my body back online, right? Because my body goes into that old PTSD mode. So we have to get our brain and body speaking the same language, and then we're able to access that trust for the other person, right? And that trust for ourselves, because that's where that trust for ourselves comes from.
I love that you bring that up, Mauri, because when we're talking about this conscious, purposeful engagement, this conscious, purposeful way of partnering and resolving conflict and navigating the relationship, the illusion is that you're not going to continue to have these triggers, and you're not going to have these moments where you turn into that teenager version of yourself, and you're not going to have these moments where you both go there in all the bad ways, and bring back all the old shit. And what I love is, and I tell clients this all the time, they're like, well, how do I know I'm not going to go back? Because it's too late. You can't.
Yep.
You can't. You will, but then you can't unknow what you know now.
Yes.
And so wisdom at some point is going to kick it back in. And I love that you share that, because you're like, why are we doing this?
Yep.
Because once you have done the work and once you have become aware, you can't unsee it anymore.
Oh,
you can't unsee a different way of thinking and a different way of
Yep.
framing things. And you can't unsee your own self-awareness. And also, again, as you get to know your partner better, you can't unsee their trauma in it
Right.
as well. And so you hear everything through different lenses now. You hear everything through a different filter.
Yep.
And so I think it's so important that when we're like, oh, I want this conscious relationship, that means we won't fight anymore. No, it means you're going to catch things faster. It means
Yep.
you're going to be able to back faster. You're
Yep.
going to have better tools. You're going to be able to engage those tools sooner. You're going to, like any muscle, you've got to practice it. And the only way to practice is by having these conflicts.
Yeah. Yes.
And by happening in real time, while simultaneously, as you mentioned, continuing to work on yourself.
Yes.
That both of you are continuing to work out, the internal muscles, but essentially you're going to the gym and you're working on yourself so that you're continuously bringing a stronger version of yourself to a relationship. And that in and of itself is going to a lot for that discipline and that ability to say, I need to go for a run. Love you. Gotta go so I don't kill you right now. And then I'll be back and maybe I'll be a little nicer and we'll be able to work this out.
Yes. Yes.
So just be able to show up a little differently where you wouldn't have caught it in that more immature, that more traumatized, unevolved version of yourself wouldn't have been able to catch it. You would have been stuck in this loop with your partner.
100%. Yeah.
And by one thing I always say, I have so many people ask me all the time, but I'm doing the work, but the other person isn't. What's really incredible about relationships is the dynamic can't continue as it is while you're doing the work. So when you show up differently, them mirroring the old version of your dynamic won't function. It won't work. So when you show up differently, they have to shift, or it's just not gonna. So, if you're clinging to the relationship was the thing that pushed him away. When you stop clinging, his avoidance doesn't matter. As an example, like if someone's pushing you away and you're clinging and then you stop clinging, there's nothing for them to run away from anymore. And so naturally when we shift our side of the dynamic, the other side has to shift. But that can't be the goal. Sometimes, like you mentioned early on in the early stages, that is the goal. You're like, well, if I do something differently, hopefully they'll change. But ultimately, as you practice, you realize the benefit is your own.
Yes.
Regardless of whether or not they change. But usually one of the payoffs is that it can't continue as it was previously anyways, because you're no longer participating in that way of engaging. So
that's so interesting. I've never heard someone put it that way. And I love that perspective. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Sometimes it means they exit. Sometimes it means the relationship is over, but it just can't continue if one person shifts.
And here's the thing. If that person does exit, you are creating such an amazing foundation for yourself for the next right person, right? And so no matter what, it is such meaningful work that you're doing for yourself, right? And trusting that the alignment is going to reveal itself to you, right? If it's not that person, then you're making space in your life for the next right person to come in, and you're going to attract somebody on that next vibration, on that next level, that you've leveled up to. So, no matter what, turning that flashlight on yourself and giving yourself what you need and becoming that person is going to benefit you. It's in the way that you want it to, right? And so, yeah, that's such a great reminder, Lindsay.
Well, Mauri, I am so sad to have to call this bring this to an end today, but this was just the best. And thank you so much for taking the time to share your story, share your wisdom, and just give your gift to our audience and to so many people, so many girls and women around here. And I hope to soon, in the next couple of months, maybe have you back on and we can dive into a little more parenting, a little more codependency, and have some more conversations around that. But thank you for sharing your journey. And where can people reach you if they'd like support and to utilize your services?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I hang out a lot on Instagram, so you can find me at Mauri Helena or at Girls Empowerment Experience. You can also go to girlsempowermentexperience.com and find out about our mentorship program. We work with girls, young women, teens in a confidence, courage, and connection building program. So we use all kinds of modalities, movement, mindfulness, mindset. We combine talking with all of those modalities to help girls be themselves and find their own self-love journey. So
start them early.
If you want to learn
a whole new generation.
Questions, or you just need somebody to talk to, you need help, or you just need a friend, please reach out anytime. I'm always here for you. And like I said, I really think, I'll quote Michael Gervais again, it's through relationships we become. And so that's what I'm here for. I'm here for that human connection and to heal and grow together. And so if you need help with that, or you just need someone to talk to, reach out anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And I am so excited to announce that my next interview will actually be with Mauri's hubby, Josh Wingate, who's a well-known actor, martial artist, a coach also, and a musician, and many other accolades behind his name. So I'm so excited to hear his side of the journey, which very much is different, but mirrors yours. And also to get that male perspective on what it's been like for him with all of the challenges that come with that and the expectations that come with that. So I'm just so grateful that I am privileged enough to get both of you. So we'll be doing a few episodes with him coming soon. So everybody tune in. And in the meantime, thank you for listening, and follow me at Lift Therapy. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thanks, Mauri.
So much.
I hope that episode was helpful. Hey, listen, if you want to share your singlehood journey, if you've gone somewhere and come back, if you have revelations and wisdom, please share your story. It's going to help other people. Nothing makes us feel more connected than hearing other people's stories. So just send me the audio of your story, and you could just record it directly from your phone and email it to theangrytherapist@gmail.com. Also, if you want our Single on Purpose newsletter, go to singleonpurpose.life. That's singleonpurpose.life. You will get tools and articles and other people's stories, and also Zoom links to private gathers. So if you want to join our community, go to singleonpurpose.life. Thank you for listening. Be well. We hope you tell a friend. Hey, before you go, I want to invite you to the Single on Purpose private community online. It's off of social media, no ads, no algorithms. We got forums, we got live groups, we got webinars, and we have social hangs. We also have offline in-person hangs happening soon. So check us out. Go to singleonpurpose.life. That's singleonpurpose.life, and I will see you inside.